I built this house with my late husband, every brick a memory. Now, it doesn't feel like mine. For 6 months, my son and his wife have lived under my roof, bringing their financial troubles with them. But it's more than debt. It's the hushed phone calls, the way they avoid my gaze. They are hiding something in my own home. My name is Genevieve. I am 58 years old, and for the first time since my husband passed, I feel like a stranger in my own home. This house, standing solid in the suburbs of Denver, was our shared dream. I oversaw the accounts at Apex Financial Solutions for 30 years, and I understand logic, numbers, and foundations. Every ledger must balance. Every beam in this house was placed with purpose. My life, until recently, reflected that same careful order. 6 months ago, that order was disturbed. My son, Arthur, and his wife, Clarissa, arrived on my doorstep with suitcases and strained faces. Arthur had lost his job, they said. They were facing financial difficulties and just needed a place to stay for a little while, just until they could get back on their feet. Of course, I said yes. He is my only son. In the beginning, I admit, the house felt warmer. The silence I had grown accustomed to as a widow was filled with the sounds of family again. But the warmth has cooled, replaced by a thin, brittle tension that settles over us like dust. Their presence, once a comfort, has become a weight. Conversations die the moment I walk into the kitchen. I will hear the low murmur of their voices, and as my foot crosses the threshold, silence, complete and sudden. Clarissa will be staring into her coffee cup, and Arthur will suddenly find something fascinating on his phone screen. Clarissa, especially, has become a creature of whispers. Several times a day. She paces the back porch, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low, urgent hiss that I cannot quite decipher. When she comes back inside, her smile is bright, brittle, and aimed somewhere just over my shoulder. And Arthur, my son, who used to tell me everything, can no longer meet my eyes. He spends his days glued to his phone, his brow furrowed in a permanent state of anxiety. The easy laughter we once shared has vanished. He is a ghost at my dinner table, moving food around his plate, his shoulders hunched. The mail, which I used to collect on my morning walk, has become a point of contention. I've noticed envelopes arriving that look distinctly official, with return addresses from banks or legal firms. But I never get a close look. Clarissa seems to have an internal clock timed to the mail carrier's arrival. She is always there first, snatching the bundle from the box, shuffling through it quickly before I can see what's there. I tried to breach the subject, as gently as I knew how. One evening, I offered to look at their finances. I spent 3 decades balancing budgets. Arthur, I said softly, perhaps I can see something you've missed. There is no shame in needing help. Before Arthur could even form a word, Clarissa laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't match the tightness in her eyes. Oh, Genevieve, don't you worry your head about it, she said, patting my hand. Everything is perfectly under control. Arthur is just about to land some very big opportunities. Isn't that right, honey? Arthur just nodded, his gaze fixed on his lap. The lies are becoming clumsy. Last night, I came downstairs for a glass of water. I paused in the hallway when I heard Clarissa's voice from the kitchen, sharp and stripped of all its forced sweetness. We cannot wait any longer, she snapped at Arthur. It is the only solution. I stepped into the doorway. They both froze. Clarissa's transformation was immediate, her face rearranging itself into a pleasant mask. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I was just telling Arthur about an online course I want to take. We can't wait to register. You know, an online course." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. My mind, the mind of an accountant, began to run calculations. The secrecy, the avoidance, the intercepted mail, the desperation in her voice. They were not just in financial trouble. They were in something deep, and they were pulling me in with them. My mother's intuition, combined with an accountant's instinct for fraud, told me one very clear thing: something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. I felt a chill settle into the house, a coldness that had nothing to do with the Colorado air. I was an intruder in my own home, a ghost padding silently through rooms that were suddenly filled with secrets. I picked up the phone to call my sister, Beatrice. "B," I started, my voice lower than I intended. "I'm worried about Arthur." "Worried how?" Beatrice has always been the practical one, the foil to my methodical nature. I tried to explain. The whispers, the intercepted mail, the way Arthur looked right through me. "It's a feeling. B. Something is wrong. They're not just struggling. They're hiding." "A feeling isn't proof, Jen," she said gently, though I knew she was concerned. "Do you have anything concrete? I didn't." "Not yet." After I hung up, her words echoed in my mind. Concrete. I had built my life on concrete facts, on numbers that added up. It was time to find them. I began to pay closer attention. I am, by nature, a meticulous person. I notice when a book is replaced on the shelf at the wrong angle, or when the spice jars are out of alphabetical order. And I noticed, with a cold prickle of dread, that the velvet-lined box in my top dresser drawer was not quite as I had left it. I opened it. My jewellery, a collection of modest but meaningful pieces, looked disturbed, as if someone had been rummaging. I sifted through the necklaces and earrings, my heart starting to beat a little faster. And then I knew what was missing. My grandmother's jade brooch, a deep green oval set in silver, a piece she had worn every Sunday. It was gone. I found Clarissa in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. I kept my voice level. "Clarissa, have you by any chance seen my grandmother's jade brooch? It was in my jewellery box, and I can't seem to locate it." She looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes before she smiled. It was that bright, brittle smile again. "A brooch, I'm sure I haven't. You've probably just misplaced it." "Mom?" She laughed lightly. "At this age, it's perfectly normal for your memory to start getting a little foggy." A foggy memory? At this age? The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was not just a dismissal. It was an assessment. It was how they saw me. Not as the woman who had run a high-level accounting department, not as the matriarch of the family, but as a senile old woman whose possessions were just waiting to be claimed. A person who could be easily manipulated, easily dismissed. That was the moment the dread turned into something else. It crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. They had miscalculated. My mind was anything but foggy. That night, I did what I did best. I researched. I used the skills that had served me for 30 years, diving into the deep web of online security, surveillance, and data. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my search terms precise. Within an hour, I had found what I needed. I ordered a device using my private credit card, with next-day delivery to a nearby pickup locker. It was a simple, common item, a USB wall charger. Except this one contained a high-fidelity, voice-activated microphone. A wave of self-loathing washed over me. I was going to spy on my own son. I was violating the sanctity of my home, the very trust that family is built on. But the fear, the icy certainty that I was being systematically undermined, was stronger than my guilt. The accountant in me needed to see the real ledger, not the doctored books they were showing me. The package arrived the next day. I retrieved it, the small box feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. That evening, I announced my plans at dinner. "I think I'm going to drive up to Boulder tomorrow," I said, forcing a casual tone. "I haven't seen Beatrice in weeks, and I thought I'd stay for a few days. Give you two some space." I watched their faces. Arthur looked up, a flicker of guilt, perhaps. But Clarissa beamed. The relief was palpable, flooding her features with a brightness that was almost grotesque. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful," she gushed. "You deserve a break. Have so much fun." Her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. The next morning, as I packed my overnight bag, I waited until they were both in the living room. I walked into the kitchen. Their favorite spot for late-night conferences was the breakfast nook. I located an outlet, partially hidden behind the heavy drapes, but perfectly positioned. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I plugged the charger in. It blended seamlessly. I zipped my bag, walked to the door, and let them kiss me goodbye. "Drive safe," Arthur mumbled. "Have a wonderful time," Clarissa chirped. I got in my car, the lie of my destination sitting like gravel in my throat. I was not going to Boulder. Not yet. I did not drive to Boulder. I pointed the car east, away from the mountains, and merged onto the highway. I drove for just 15 minutes, exiting into a commercial area I rarely visited, and checked into a sterile, beige-coloured hotel. The room smelled of faint bleach. I sat on the edge of the stiff comforter, my overnight bag resting by the door, completely untouched. I stared at the blank television screen, my phone heavy in my hand. A wave of nausea rolled over me. The guilt was suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I was a mother hiding in a cheap hotel, plotting to eavesdrop on my own son. I had violated his trust, my own principles, the very foundation of my home. But beneath the guilt, a colder, sharper feeling persisted, the instinct of an accountant who knows the books are cooked, the instinct of a mother who knows her child is in danger, or perhaps is the danger. I barely slept. I watched the digital clock on the nightstand click past 2 in the morning, then 3. The next day. I waited until 11, a time I knew they'd likely be awake, perhaps even out. I drove back to my street, parking a block away and walking, rehearsing my excuse, my medication. I forgot my prescription bottles. It was a plausible lie, thin but functional. I let myself in the front door. "Arthur, Clarissa," I called out, my voice artificially bright. The house was completely still, not just empty, but silent in a way that felt wrong, as if it were holding its breath. Their shoes were gone from the mat by the door. Their car was gone from the driveway. I moved quickly, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I walked straight to the kitchen, to the outlet hidden by the drapes. I unplugged the device, the fake charger, and swapped it with the identical, harmless one I'd bought as a decoy. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds. I clutched the device in my hand, walked briskly back to the front door, locked it, and left. I didn't breathe easily until I was back in the hotel room with the deadbolt engaged. I sat at the small desk, the room's shadows feeling deeper now. I pulled out my laptop and my earbuds, plugging the device in with trembling hands. I clicked on the audio file. At first, it was just noise. The clatter of plates, the scrape of a chair, the rumble of the refrigerator. I heard Clarissa laugh at something. A light, genuine laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. It made my stomach twist. And then, the sounds faded, and their voices came through, sharp and clear, recorded hours after I had left. "She's finally gone," Clarissa's voice said. It was sharp, acidic, dripping with a relief that sounded like venom. God, Arthur. I could not stand one more day of playing the dutiful, loving daughter-in-law. It was suffocating. There was a long pause. I heard Arthur sigh, a heavy, weary sound. "Clarissa, she's still my mother. She is a gold mine." "Arthur," Clarissa snapped, her voice dropping to a cold, hard whisper that sliced right through me. "Don't you mother me. Do you have any idea what this house is worth, fully paid off? And the old man's art collection in the study? We are sitting on an absolute fortune, Arthur, while creditors are calling every single day, threatening to break our legs." I froze, the earbuds cold in my ears. Creditors. Threats. Break their legs. This wasn't about a lost job. This wasn't financial difficulties. This was something dangerous. They weren't just struggling. They were being hunted. My son was being hunted. And they weren't looking at me as family. They were looking at me, at my home, as collateral, as a solution. I sat paralyzed, the blood draining from my face, and the recording was still playing. I sat there, frozen in the cheap hotel chair, unable to pull the earbuds out. My son was in debt to loan sharks, people who threatened physical violence. The revelation was sickening, a mother's worst fear realized. But the recording wasn't finished. I had to know. I had to hear all of it. I listened as the conversation unraveled the full scope of their disaster. Arthur's big opportunity wasn't a job at all. It was some kind of speculative venture capital deal, a high-risk gamble that had imploded. He hadn't just lost his savings. He had lost borrowed money. Money from people who don't write polite letters. They were in a hole so deep, they couldn't see the sky. "We've sold everything. Arthur." Clarissa's voice continued, the earlier venom replaced by a brittle, pragmatic chill. "The savings are gone. The car is next. That stupid jade brooch I lifted from her drawer only got us $300. My grandmother's brooch, sold for a pittance." The casual, cruel way she said "lifted" confirmed it. It wasn't misplaced. It was stolen. The woman who smiled at my face, who called me Mom, was a common thief. But even that, the theft of a priceless heirloom, paled in comparison to what came next. "We tried asking her for a loan," Clarissa said, and I could hear her pacing. "She refused." A cold fury rose in me. They had never asked me for a loan. They had skirted the issue, offered vague troubles, but they had never once sat me down and asked for help, because they knew. They knew they weren't asking for help. They were asking for a bailout from a mess so sordid they couldn't even name it. My refusal was a fiction they had created to justify what they were planning. We've tried borrowing her jewelry, Clarissa went on, but it's not enough. It'll never be enough. There is only one way left. There was a long silence. I heard the sound of a glass being set down. Hard. It was Arthur who finally spoke. His voice so low, so hesitant. It was barely a mumble. Those papers? The ones you printed? I'm not sure. Clarissa. Forging my mother's signature. That's a felony. I stopped breathing. The air in the hotel room was thick and cold. Forging my signature. Clarissa let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound completely devoid of humour. A felony, Arthur. Getting your legs broken by a loan shark is major. A felony is just a word. You got the samples of her signature from those old checks. Right. We're mortgaging this house. We're what? Arthur's voice was sharp with panic. A home equity line of credit, Clarissa said, her voice slow and clear, as if explaining to a child. Or maybe a reverse mortgage. I've filed the applications for both, using the signature you practiced. With her age and the value of this place, the bank is practically begging to give us the money. My hand flew to my mouth. A reverse mortgage. Taking the equity, my life's work, the home I built with my husband, and turning it into cash for them. They had forged my name. They were actively, criminally, trying to steal my home from under me. They're just waiting for the final verification, Clarissa said, her voice smooth with triumph. The first disbursement should be approved soon. We just need her not to find out for a few more weeks. By the time she realizes anything, the money will be gone, the creditors will be paid, and we'll be figuring out our next move. I tore the earbuds from my ears, gasping, as if I had been holding my breath underwater. My stomach heaved. I stumbled to the bathroom, bracing my hands on the cold laminate counter, and stared at my own reflection. The woman looking back was a fool. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a stolen brooch. They weren't just trying to get a loan. They were stealing my house, my past, my future. My son, my only child, was an active participant in the destruction of my life. The nausea I felt was no longer guilt. It was a cold, pure rage. My hands were steady on the wheel as I drove north on the US 36. The rage had burned away the nausea, leaving a cold, hard clarity. This time, I was going to Boulder. This time, it was real. Beatrice opened the door, her face etched with concern. She had been waiting for my call, but I knew I had to do this in person. Jen, she said, pulling me into a hug. You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I said. I walked past her into the kitchen, the familiar scent of her herbal tea doing nothing to calm the ice in my veins. I didn't sit. I pulled my laptop from my bag, set it on her counter, and plugged in the small audio player. You need to hear this, I said. All of it. I watched her face as she listened. Beatrice is not a patient woman, and she is fiercely loyal. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. And then, as Clarissa's cold, calculating voice filled the room, to a pure, unadulterated fury. By the time the recording reached the part about the forgery, Beatrice's knuckles were white, her entire body rigid. The moment the audio file clicked off, she lunged for her phone. I am calling 911, she seethed, her fingers jabbing at the screen. I am having that filthy, gold-digging monster and your spineless son dragged out of your house in handcuffs. No, My voice was sharp, and it stopped her cold. She looked at me, incredulous. No, Genevieve, did you hear the same thing I did? They are committing a felony. They are stealing your home. I know exactly what they are doing, I said, my voice low and steady. The fog of shock had cleared, and the accountant was now in full control. If you call the police right now, what happens? They'll get a lawyer. They'll deny it. They'll say it was just angry talk, a fantasy. They'll cancel the loan application immediately. The evidence will vanish. An audio recording is a he said, she said in court. I don't want them scared off. I want them caught in the act. Beatrice slowly lowered her phone. What are you planning? I need proof of the fraud itself, not just the conspiracy, I said. I picked up my own phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Samuel. It's Genevieve. I'm sorry to call you on a weekend, but it is an emergency. Samuel has been my real estate lawyer for 20 years. He handled the closing on this house. He is precise, discreet, and trustworthy. I explained the situation, clinically, leaving out the emotional betrayal and sticking to the facts: the fabricated debt, the intercepted mail, the forged signature. I heard him take a sharp breath. Genevieve, are you safe? I am at Beatrice's house in Boulder. I need you to check the county records. Samuel, now. I heard the rapid tapping of his keyboard. The silence on the line stretched for a long, agonizing minute. My God, he finally said, his voice grim. You're right. A uniform residential loan application was filed 4 days ago. It's for a home equity line of credit. It's all electronic. But the signature, it's a very good forgery of your name. It's been flagged for final verification, but it's in the system. I knew it, I whispered, the confirmation making me feel sick, but also vindicated. I will put a lock on your credit and notify the bank's fraud department immediately. Samuel said, all business. Wait, I said. Do not notify them yet. Not for another day or two. I need to know the rest of their plan. Genevieve, that is incredibly risky. Samuel, please, I insisted. Just prepare the legal blocks. But I am not done. From Beatrice's house, I went online. I ordered 2 more items, shipped to her address, 2 nanny cams, disguised as digital clocks, and a new audio device, one that could broadcast live to my phone. The next day, I drove back to my house. I told Arthur and Clarissa that my visit was going well, but that I'd forgotten some important paperwork for my taxes. They were visibly annoyed by my return. While they were running errands, likely checking the status of their fraudulent loan, I moved with an accountant's precision. I replaced the audio bug in the kitchen with the new one. I placed 1 clock in the kitchen and 1 in the living room. That night, back in Beatrice's guest room, I opened the app on my phone. I put in my earbuds and I listened. I heard them arguing. The loan was delayed. What if it gets flagged? Arthur's voice was thin with panic. What if she finds out? Clarissa's reply was sharp, impatient. She won't. But this is taking too long. We need the backup plan. Did you talk to that doctor? I felt a cold prickle. Doctor, I did, Arthur said, his voice dropping. Dr. Salinger. He said it's possible. He said if we can provide a few affidavits, if we can prove cognitive decline or erratic behavior, he can help fast-track a medical guardianship. The phone almost slipped from my hand. It was a second, more sinister plot. At this age, your memory gets foggy. My blood ran cold. They weren't just trying to steal my money. They were planning to steal my mind, my autonomy, my very identity. They were going to have me declared incompetent so they could seize control of everything. The plan to declare me mentally incompetent was a line. They had crossed from desperation into pure, calculated malice. The accountant in me was done analyzing. The woman who built this house was ready to fight. I picked up the phone. "Samuel, they have a second plan," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "A Dr. Salinger, who they plan to use to fast-track a medical guardianship." The sharp intake of breath on Samuel's end was the only sound for a moment. "My God," he said, his voice stripped of all legal pleasantries. "They are trying to erase you. Right. We are moving immediately. I am placing an executive freeze on your credit reports and all property titles under your name. As of right now, nothing moves. That loan application is dead in the water. It will be flagged as potential fraud the instant they try to push it through." "Good," I said, feeling the first small sense of control returning. "What about the doctor?" "I am retaining a private investigator, Genevieve. Today. I've heard rumors about men like Salinger, doctors who specialize in elder disputes and will testimony for the right price. We will find out exactly who he is, and I promise you, his history will be illustrative. This ends." The pieces were moving. Samuel was handling the legal defenses, but I had to handle the battlefield, my home. "B," I said, turning to my sister, who was watching me with a mixture of horror and awe. "I'm going back." "You are not," she protested, standing up. "Genevieve, they are dangerous. They are trying to have you committed. They are trying to build a case. B," I explained, my mind working with a speed I hadn't felt since my retirement. "They need evidence of my cognitive decline. They can't get that if I'm hiding in Boulder. The only way to beat them is to walk back in, play the part of the unaware mother, and let them walk right into the trap. I have cameras, I have microphones. Now I need the culprits." From Beatrice's living room, I listened to the live feed from my kitchen. They were restless. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed my own home number. Clarissa answered on the second ring, her voice strained. "Mum, is everything okay?" "Oh, yes, dear," I said, injecting a light, airy tone into my voice. "Boulder is lovely, just lovely. But you know, I'm feeling a little homesick for my own bed. I think I'm going to cut the trip short and come home this evening." I hung up before she could reply. I kept the audio feed on. I heard her phone slam down on the granite countertop. "Damn it!" Her voice was a shriek. "She's coming back. Now tonight, the loan hasn't cleared. It's still pending. Why is she coming back early, Og?" "Calm down." Arthur's voice was thin, panicky. "Jesus, Clarissa, calm down. Maybe she's just homesick. That's normal. We just act normal. Everything is fine." "Normal," Clarissa hissed. "Nothing is normal. You fool. We're running out of time." I smiled, a thin, cold smile that Beatrice did not return. I packed my bag, stopped at a gift shop on Pearl Street to buy a box of fudge and a small Denver keychain, the props of a happy, oblivious tourist. When I pulled into my driveway an hour later, they were waiting in the foyer, composed. Clarissa rushed forward, her face a mask of concern. "Mum, you're home? We were so worried you were driving in the dark." "Oh, it was fine," I said, handing her the small paper bag. "I brought you two some fudge." I looked at Arthur. He was pale, his eyes darting between me and his wife. He looked sick. You must be exhausted from the drive. Clarissa cooed, hovering, taking my coat. Are you tired? You look a little flushed. Let me make you a nice cup of chamomile tea. You should sit down. The performance was masterful. I saw the narrative she was building, word by word. She's tired. She's confused. She's frail. This was the foundation for Dr. Salinger. I turned and smiled at her, my sweetest, most grandmotherly smile. No, thank you, dear, I said, patting her arm. I'm perfectly fine. It's good to be home. I walked past them, up the stairs, the absolute master of my house once again. They watched me go, their anxiety radiating off them in waves. They thought I was the prey. They had no idea I was the hunter. The following 3 days were a masterclass in domestic theatre. I acted the part of the content, retired widow. I deadheaded the roses in the front garden, the sun warm on my back. I sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a novel, while in truth I was listening to the live feed from the kitchen through a single, hidden earbud, and they acted their parts. Clarissa was the doting, concerned daughter-in-law, offering me tea I didn't want and fluffing pillows I wasn't sitting on. Arthur was the stressed, distant son, which was so close to the truth that it was hardly an act at all. He just looked grey. Meanwhile, the real work was happening. Samuel had confirmed the private investigator's report. Dr. Salinger was exactly what we suspected, a professional witness with a history of disciplinary actions for undue influence in competency hearings. He was a vulture, and Clarissa was inviting him to the feast. Through my earbud, I heard the full spectrum of their desperation. The loan was no longer pending. It was now paused due to a verification issue. They couldn't access it, but they couldn't cancel it without arousing suspicion. Their creditors were no longer making calls. They were making threats. He said by Monday, Arthur. I heard Clarissa hiss, her voice a low, frantic vibration. Not next Monday, this Monday. He's not asking anymore. What do you want me to do? Clarissa. Arthur's voice was broken. We can't get the money. It's frozen. Then we move on. She snapped. I told you. Plan B is the only way now. It has to be this Friday. This Friday. Arthur, do you hear me? You will take her to Salinger. You will tell her it's a routine physical. I'll handle the preparation. I'll call him and give him the background. Her fogginess. Her misplacing things. How worried we are. This Friday. That was tomorrow. On Thursday evening. I stood in my kitchen. I was making lasagna, Arthur's favourite since he was a child. The rich smell of the bolognese sauce filled the air, a scent of family, of love, of a life that was now a complete and utter fabrication. The irony was bitter, but my hands were steady as I layered the pasta and the cheese. Clarissa entered, drawn in by the scent, or perhaps by her own timeline. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, forcing a casual smile. That smells wonderful. Mom, she said. It's Arthur's favourite, I replied, not looking up. She took a breath. This was it. Speaking of health, Mom, Arthur and we've been a little worried about you lately, and we'd like to take you for a general checkup tomorrow, just to make sure everything's all right. I've scheduled you with a new doctor, a really wonderful man, Dr. Salinger. I paused, my hand hovering over the baking dish. I turned around slowly, wiping my hands on my apron, and gave her my most serene, gentle smile. Oh, Clarissa. That is so thoughtful, I said. But it's quite unnecessary, dear. I've already scheduled an appointment with Dr. Evans, my own family doctor. I've been seeing him for 20 years. You know. Her smile faltered. Just a fraction. Oh, well, that's fine. But Salinger is a specialist. In fact, I continued, cutting her off smoothly. Dr. Evans is coming here tomorrow morning, at 10. He said he wanted to meet both of you. The blood drained from Clarissa's face. Her mask of concern didn't just slip, it shattered. Coming here, she repeated, her voice suddenly 2 shades higher. Here? Why would he come here? I turned back to the lasagna and sprinkled the last of the parmesan on top. Oh, I said, my voice light and calm. I just have some health and legal matters I wanted to discuss, and I thought, for something this important, the whole family should be present. Friday morning arrived with a bright, cold sunlight that did nothing to warm the atmosphere inside my house. At precisely 9:50 a.m., Arthur and Clarissa were seated on the sofa in the living room. They were visibly agitated. I had watched them all morning from a distance, watching them confer in low, anxious whispers, their heads bent together. They had spent the last hour rehearsing. I heard them through my earbud, Clarissa coaching Arthur on what to say to Dr. Evans, how to phrase their concerns about my memory lapses and isolation. They believed they could charm, bully, or deceive my family doctor of 20 years. They thought he would see a frail, elderly woman and 2 concerned children. They had no idea who was actually coming to the meeting I had arranged. I, on the other hand, was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. I was in the kitchen, the hidden camera on the digital clock capturing their nervous fidgeting in the living room. The live audio feed was crisp in my ear. I was preparing a tray, the rich aroma of fresh brewed coffee filling the room. I carefully placed 4 cups, 4 saucers, and the antique silver sugar bowl on the tray. I was a hostess preparing for guests. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the doorbell rang. I watched on my phone's screen as Arthur and Clarissa jumped. They looked at each other, a shared glance of panic and resolve. Okay, Clarissa whispered, smoothing her skirt. Let me do the talking first. Remember, we are just worried. Arthur, his face pale and slick with a fine sheen of sweat, stood up and walked to the door. He took a deep, shaky breath before pulling it open. Dr. Evans, he began, a forced, welcoming smile already forming on his lips. The smile died instantly. It was not Dr. Evans. On my doorstep stood Samuel, my lawyer, looking as somber and imposing as a federal judge. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit. Beside him, flanking him, were 2 other men. They were also in suits, but they were cut differently, more functional, and they carried an unmistakable air of authority. Hello, Arthur, Samuel said, his voice polite but ironclad. He didn't wait for an invitation, but stepped directly into the foyer, the other 2 men following him, their footsteps silent but heavy on the hardwood floor. I am Samuel Lewis, your mother's attorney. Samuel gestured to the men with him. This is Detective Walsh, and this is Detective Miller. From the living room, Clarissa shot to her feet, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Detectives! Her voice was a sharp, brittle thing. What is this? What is going on, Mom? Mom, what did you do? As if on cue, I walked out of the kitchen, the heavy silver tray perfectly balanced in my steady hands. I placed it carefully on the coffee table in front of the sofa, right between my son and his wife, and the law. I looked up, meeting Clarissa's wild, accusing eyes. I didn't do anything. Clarissa, I said, my voice as calm as the surface of a clear, deep lake. But you two did. Arthur stumbled backward, as if shoved. I don't understand. He turned to me, his eyes wide, pleading for an explanation, for a different reality. Mum, what is this? This has to be some kind of terrible misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. Arthur, Samuel said, his voice filling the suddenly silent room. The detectives stood, impassive, watching, one by the door, one near the fireplace. My house was secure. The trap was sprung. Detective Walsh did not look at me. He looked directly and only at Clarissa. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a professional tool. Ma'am, we are investigating a formal complaint regarding fraud, specifically the forgery of a signature on a home mortgage application. Clarissa's face went chalk white, a stark contrast to her dark hair. But she was a fighter. She even managed to produce a short, incredulous laugh. A mortgage? I have no idea what you're talking about. This is insane. There is obviously a major mistake. There is no mistake, Mrs. Harris. Samuel's voice cut through the room, sharp as glass. He stepped forward and placed a thick, legal-sized manila folder on the coffee table. He flipped open the cover. This is a digital copy of the home equity line of credit application filed 4 days ago with Beacon Trust Bank, in my client's name. The application was for $150,000. He slid a single piece of paper from the top and turned it to face her. And this is the final page, with the signature. A very meticulous forgery of my client's name, but a forgery nonetheless. Arthur's head swiveled from the paper to my face. His mouth was open, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He had started to shake, a deep, rattling tremor that began in his hands and was now visibly vibrating his shoulders. He looked at the document, then at me, as if he couldn't decide which of us was the source of his terror. This was my moment. I reached into the pocket of my apron, my hand closing around the small, plastic device. I pulled it out and placed it gently on the coffee table, right beside Samuel's damning file. It made a small, definitive click on the wood. The paperwork is what you did. Clarissa, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. And this, I tapped the small black rectangle, is the proof of what you planned. Her eyes widened. For the first time, raw panic flashed in her gaze. She knew what it was. She understood the trip to Boulder, the forgotten medication. I pressed the small play button. The room was utterly silent. And then, her voice filled the space, cold, sharp, and full of contempt. She is a gold mine. Arthur. Forging my mother's signature. That's a felony. The detective's eyes moved from the recording to Clarissa. Their expressions were stone. And then, Arthur's voice, weak, hesitant, the sound of a man already defeated. Dr. Salinger, he said, if we can prove cognitive decline. That was the sound that broke him. Hearing his own voice, his own betrayal, echoing in the living room in front of his mother and 2 detectives, was more than his weak spine could bear. A sound tore out of him, a high-pitched, strangled noise that was half sob, half scream. He didn't just slump, he collapsed. He fell forward onto the sofa, his entire body convulsing, and buried his face in his hands. "I didn't," he wailed, the words tearing out of him, muffled by his palms. "I didn't want to. She made me. She made me do it." He lifted his head, his face slick with tears and sweat, his eyes wild. He wasn't looking at the detectives. He was looking at me, his mother. "Clarissa. It was all her," he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "She said it was the only way. She said we had to. I told her it was wrong. Mom. I told her I didn't want to." He was babbling, the confession a pathetic, desperate flood. "Mom, please, please. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't want any of this." It was the first confession, a complete, unadulterated admission of guilt, delivered with all the pathetic cowardice of a child blaming his accomplice. The detectives watched, their faces impassive. They didn't have to say a word. The first domino had fallen. Clarissa looked past the detectives, past me, and stared at her weeping, broken husband. Her face, which had been a mask of white panic, now hardened into something unrecognizable, a pure, distilled contempt. "You coward," she hissed. The words were low, but they sliced through Arthur's sobbing and silenced him instantly. He looked up, his face a mess of tears. "Shut up!" she shrieked at him, her voice cracking. "Just shut your pathetic, snivelling mouth." She whipped around, her wild, burning eyes landing on me. The last shred of the charming, concerned daughter-in-law was gone, incinerated by a rage that was almost spectacular in its intensity. "Yes!" she screamed, taking a step toward me. "I did it. Are you happy now I did it?" Detective Miller took an instinctive step forward, raising a hand. "Mrs. Harris, I strongly advise you. Anything you say." "Shut up." Clarissa wheeled on him, her fury so potent it was almost a physical force. "All of you. Shut up." She turned back to me, her breath coming in ragged heaves, her whole body trembling. "You sit here in this house, this $1 million shrine, on your perfect, comfortable retirement, while we were drowning. Do you have any idea what that's like? He said they would break his legs, and you sat here complaining about a brooch. You owed us. He is your son. It's family money." The room was vibrating with her voice. I met her gaze. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. I felt nothing but the hard, cold finality of the truth. "It is not family money, Clarissa," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her tirade, clear and precise. "It is my property, and you tried to steal it. You forged my name to steal this house. You sold my grandmother's heirlooms, and when that wasn't fast enough, you conspired with a quack doctor to have me declared mentally incompetent, to steal my mind, to erase me." She stared at me, her chest rising and falling. For a second, I thought she would lunge at me. Instead, a sound tore out of her, a wild, high-pitched laugh that was more terrifying than her screaming. "You are smarter than I thought. Old woman," she spat, the laughter dying into a sneer. Yes, I did it all, and I would do it again. And if it wasn't for this useless, weak, pathetic man I married—" She jabbed a finger at Arthur, who flinched as if struck. "I would have succeeded. You deserved it. Sitting up here on your throne, judging us, judging me." That was the second confession, a full, proud, and furious admission. Detective Walsh had heard enough. He moved with a swift, practiced efficiency, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Clarissa Harris," he said, his voice resonating with a finality that silenced the room. He took her arm in a grip she could not break. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, suddenly reverting to panic, twisting in his grip. But her fight was useless. He was already securing the cuffs behind her back. Walsh nodded to Miller, who had walked over to Arthur. Arthur was just sitting there, rocking, his sobs now the high, thin keening of a terrified animal. "Come on, sir," Miller said, not unkindly. "On your feet. You as well, as an accomplice." He had to physically haul Arthur up from the sofa. They were led out of my living room. Clarissa was still screaming, a torrent of curses and rage that echoed down the hallway and out the front door, a grotesque violation of the morning air. Arthur was just a weeping, boneless wreck, his shoulders shaking as Miller guided him into the back of the police car. The front door clicked shut. The sound of the sirens slowly faded as the cars pulled away, their red and blue lights flashing against the walls before disappearing down the street. The silence they left behind was absolute. Samuel, who had stood silently by the fireplace through the entire ordeal, let out a long, slow breath. He walked over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. I stood there, looking at the coffee tray, at the 4 cups, the sugar bowl, the small pitcher of cream. I had not cried. I did not feel relief. I did not feel victorious. I just felt a profound, echoing cold, an emptiness that filled every corner of the room. My house was finally, truly, quiet. Thank you so much for listening to the whole story. It means a lot to share this. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Let me know in the comments and share what you're thinking. Please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and maybe even tap the hype button to help more folks find this video.